There are two great tragedies in life. The first is not getting what you want. The second is getting it. That's the wisdom of Oscar Wilde over 100 years ago in Lady Windermere's Fan, and there's a lot of evidence that even though it sounds like an empty witticism, Wilde is right. In today's Torah portion, the moment that Adam and Eve get what they want, which is paradise, they sabotage it and lose it. The moment Noah and his children survive the flood, Noah's children sin, and they lose that moment. That happens again and again in the Torah. The moment that the Israelites are freed from Egypt, they build a golden calf. And in one of the most brilliant insights on the Torah that I have ever read from the Kotzker Rebbe, he said, what was the hardest moment for Abraham in the Akedah, in the binding of Isaac? The hardest moment, he said, was coming down the mountain. It is afterwards, after the peak moment, after the triumph, after the joy, after the jubilation, after the partying, after the wonder, that's when you have to watch out. It was after saving the Western world that Winston Churchill was immediately voted out of office. The trial of life isn't in the moment of fire alone, because in the moment of fire we gather our forces and our adrenaline and our resolve, and then all of a sudden when it's over, we feel like we can relax a bit. And the inspiration for this sermon came from a colleague of mine at the Maimonides Fund. The Maimonides Fund has a staff both in the United States and in Israel, and one of our colleagues in Israel, Limor Weisbart, wrote on the group chat the following. She wrote, I am now at the funeral of the fallen soldier Daniel Peretz, whose body has been brought back to Israel. So many people have come to pay their final respects. Daniel was a tank commander on the front line on October 7th. Early in the morning, he rushed his crew to the tank together with Matan, Itai, and Tomer. They sought contact with the enemy and fought until the very last moment. May we know how to support the bereaved families, the wounded, and all those scarred by war, both in body and in spirit. And then she ended her text to us with the following words, may we be worthy. And I was so moved. Because granted that this is not entirely a moment of triumph, we remember that there are still 28 of our people who have not been returned, who are somewhere in Gaza, who need a proper burial. But still, like most of us, I also felt a tremendous sense of joy and relief and wonder in seeing the hostages come home. And the reminder that now we have to be worthy is incredibly important, because you know every human being has inherent dignity, but worthiness must be earned. So what has Israel become now? You'll recall that before October 7th, Israel was virtually on the brink of civil war, with hundreds of thousands of Israelis taking to the streets. What happens now? What about all the internal divisions in the society? Because you can knit together in a moment of crisis, but what happens after the crisis is over? Have you learned that, in fact, that person that I was protesting against and angry at and thought wasn't in community with me, that person risked their life for our nation? And what about those of us in the diaspora who have been fighting day after day? What do we do now that the names of the hostages are no longer on the wall? We know that the rise of anti-Semitism has been explosive, almost unbelievable, not only in America, but across the world. So what do we do now? Because I have to tell you, as you may be aware, I see at least as much fighting among those who claim to be fighting anti-Semitism as I do among those we are supposed to be opposing. The divisions inside our own community, which organization is good and which is bad, the way in which we splinter into every smaller and smaller and smaller groups. I once joked to a Jewish group that there were no 3 letters of the English alphabet that you couldn't put next to each other that wouldn't be some Jewish group. But what do we do now? Now that we actually have a long-range and sustained battle on our hands, will we be wise enough not only to point out anti-Semitism when we see it, but also wise enough to say when something is not anti-Semitism and is just disagreement? Because I see a lot of Jews who call everything anti-Semitism. And as a result, they drain the charge of all of its meaning and all of its force. Not everybody who disagrees with me is an anti-Semite. Some of them are just people. But that takes a lot of time and effort and judgment and wisdom, and not just the clenched fist that we feel when we are at war. And the danger comes after. It would be easy for the Jewish community to come apart, because we no longer have this solitary focus day after day after day after day. It would be easy for Israel to come apart. It is after the war, in some ways, that the greatest danger presents itself. How is it that the most story-driven nation on earth has been so unable to tell our story to the world? And how do we relearn to tell a story of Israel and of the Jewish people such that the world can listen to us? How do we address our friends on the right and our friends on the left? How do we teach each other that you can't only be on one part of a political divide and succeed in the world or in a nation? How do we draw Jews together at a time that we no longer turn our TVs on every single day to see what is happening? In other words, how do you breathe and still be vigilant? How do you understand that a certain phase has ended, but it is a long twilight struggle? Do you know what the rabbis say about the breaking of glass at a wedding? A wedding, the happiest time. And this couple has been building up to that moment, and then finally they are married, and there is joy, and there is wonder. And yet the rabbis say, B'makom rina sham tehei re'ada. At a moment of joy, there should be some trembling. Because we know not every day is going to be a wedding day. And there will be pains and difficulties. We'll have to come down the mountain. And I don't know about you, but in my experience, you almost never fall when you are running upstairs. But it's very easy to fall running downstairs. It is after that all the perils begin to present themselves. And so when I read that line, may we be worthy, I realized that was the key. Yes, we roused ourselves in remarkable ways over the past 2 years. And as much as the Jewish community did not succeed in stemming the tide of hostility towards Israel or towards Jews, we have a lot to be proud of. Most of us in the Jewish world stood by Israel and stood by Jews who were being, in one way or another, discriminated against in some remarkable ways. But there is no time to rest on our laurels. We have to be worthy of this moment. And to do that, you have to remember the pain of the past and the challenges that are about to face us. May we be worthy of those who fell defending us. May we be worthy of those still living with the pain of their loss. May we be worthy of the covenant that we claim, and may we be worthy not in triumph, but in faithfulness. The deepest prayer to God is not to ask God to protect us or even to save us. The deepest prayer is that we be worthy of God's protection and God's salvation. Shabbat Shalom.